Stop right now. What do you think you're doing, you damn dog?
Max didn't do anything, sir. He was just protecting his master.
Biker veteran's last wish before execution. But what his dog revealed changed everything. When Vietnam veteran Daniel Thunder Rodriguez requested to see his German Shepherd Max before his execution instead of a last meal, the warden thought it unusual. He had no idea the dog would expose the corruption that put an innocent Hell's Angel on death row. Texas death row stretched like a concrete purgatory. Fluorescent lights buzzed 24 hours a day. The smell of disinfectant mixed with human desperation. Steel doors lined corridors that had witnessed the final walks of condemned men. Here, hope died slowly, while appeals gathered dust in courtrooms that had moved on to newer cases. Efficiency mattered more than mercy in chambers designed for endings, not second chances. Daniel Thunder Rodriguez sat in cell block D, his 52-year-old frame still carrying a military bearing despite 5 years of confinement. 3 Vietnam tours had carved a discipline into his bones that prison walls couldn't break. His Hell's Angels patches were gone, but Brotherhood tattoos told stories of loyalty to country, to brothers who'd bled beside him, to the motorcycle club that became family when the civilian world failed returning veterans. Shrapnel wounds from firebase. Charlie marked his hands. PTSD episodes had cost him civilian jobs. The decorated combat veteran had become society's outcast, whose military service was forgotten when motorcycle patches made him a convenient target for prosecutors seeking career advancement through high-profile convictions, regardless of evidence pointing toward innocence. Daniel's challenge transcended death row survival. It was proving innocence when the system had decided guilt based on prejudice rather than evidence. How do you fight bias when appearance makes you the perfect scapegoat? How do you expose corruption when appeals courts believe police over veteran testimony? He fought for truth in a system designed to process rather than investigate. Warden Patricia Matthews reviewed Daniel's final request with confusion. Condemned men typically chose last meals or family phone calls before execution, not visits from dogs. Mr. Rodriguez, you're entitled to a last meal, final visitors, or spiritual counseling. Matthews explained with professional courtesy that 5 years of death row administration had taught her. Ma'am, I want to see my dog Max, Daniel replied with a dignity that military service had ingrained. His German Shepherd represented the last connection to civilian life that death row was designed to sever. Matthews paused. Service dogs weren't typical final visitors, but condemned veterans deserved consideration for a service that had protected freedoms most citizens took for granted. Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about, Daniel said quietly. Max has been fighting to keep me alive through this nightmare. The unusual request required security protocols that treated the service dog like a potential weapon, rather than medical assistance for a combat veteran managing PTSD symptoms that the justice system had never understood. Max had been living with Tank Morrison, Daniel's Hell's Angels brother, who'd maintained the dog's training during 5 years of failed appeals. The Phoenix chapter president understood that protecting Daniel's companion was protecting Daniel's sanity. "Brother's been asking about you every day," Tank told Daniel during their last visit. "Max knows something's wrong. Dogs sense things we can't." The transportation required coordination between prison officials, veterinary staff, and security personnel who'd never handled service animal visits to death row. Most condemned men's final hours involved priests, not German shepherds trained to detect psychological distress. Matthews approved the visit, recognizing that Daniel's military service record, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, 3 tours in Vietnam, deserved accommodation that the civilian justice system rarely provided to veterans whose motorcycle club membership had made them targets for systematic prejudice. The arrangement would prove more significant than anyone anticipated when Max's specialized training revealed truths that 5 years of legal appeals had failed to uncover. Max entered the visitation room with professional discipline, his German Shepherd intelligence immediately assessing the environment while maintaining focus on Daniel's emotional state. 5 years of separation hadn't diminished their bond. If anything, the forced distance had intensified the connection between the combat veteran and his service animal, trained to provide life-saving assistance. "Easy, boy," Daniel whispered as Max positioned himself for maximum psychological support. The dog's training automatically adjusted to the threatening environment that death row imposed on people whose guilt remained questionable. But Max's behavior immediately revealed something unexpected. The dog displayed defensive postures directed not at guards or the environment, but specifically at Officer Jenkins, who'd been assigned to monitor the visit despite having no apparent connection to death row administration. Max growled with recognition rather than general suspicion. His positioning suggested a preparation for violence. His alert focus identified Jenkins as a specific danger rather than an environmental concern. "What's wrong, Max?" Daniel asked, noticing his dog's targeted reaction. Officer Jenkins shifted nervously. "Animals don't like uniforms sometimes." But Max's response was clearly recognition-based, not general anxiety. Something about Jenkins threatened his partner's safety through an unknown connection to circumstances that had resulted in Daniel's wrongful conviction. Max's behavior toward Jenkins transcended protective instincts. Service dog training had programmed specific defensive postures for situations involving direct threats to his partner's safety. The growling indicated recognition, not suspicion. The positioning suggested a previous negative encounter between the animal and the officer that Daniel couldn't immediately identify. Jenkins attempted a casual dismissal. Dogs get nervous around authority figures. But Max's reaction was recognition-based, not anxiety-related. His training had exposed him to countless law enforcement interactions without similar defensive responses. This suggested a specific threat assessment based on previous experience with an individual who posed a danger to his partner. Daniel studied Jenkins while Max maintained an aggressive posture. Memory fragments began returning, suppressed by 5 years of death row stress and medication that had clouded recollection of arrest circumstances. "Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about," Daniel said quietly, watching Jenkins's increasing nervousness. "But Max remembers battles I've forgotten." The dog's continued agitation triggered recollections that prison treatments had suppressed. Jenkins' face became familiar in ways that official case records couldn't explain. Tank Morrison's surveillance from the prison parking lot wasn't coincidental. The Phoenix Hells Angels had maintained a 5-year investigation into Daniel's conviction, their loyalty extending beyond typical legal appeals to independent research that identified inconsistencies official attorneys had failed to pursue. Tank's communication equipment captured Max's specific reaction to Jenkins, creating documentation that supported a broader investigation into the officer's connection to Daniel's case, despite Jenkins' assignment to a different precinct during the alleged crime period. Ghost Martinez, monitoring from an external position, recognized the significance of Max's behavior from shared military experience where dogs identified enemy combatants through scent recognition that human perception missed. The Brotherhood's informal investigation had already identified irregularities in evidence collection and witness statements, suggesting planted evidence and coerced testimony. Max's reaction provided the first direct connection between a specific officer and the systematic corruption that had resulted in a wrongful conviction. Radio communications buzzed between chapter members. Max's identified a threat. Something's not right about that Jenkins character. Daniel's memory began returning as Max's agitation triggered recollections that medication and psychological stress had suppressed. Jenkins' presence at the arrest scene, despite official reports indicating different officers had made initial contact, an inconsistency suggesting a systematic cover-up involving multiple agencies. "I remember you now," Daniel said, studying Jenkins while Max maintained a defensive posture. "You were there when they arrested me. You planted that evidence in my saddlebags." Jenkins' nervousness increased as the recognition became apparent. "I don't know what you're talking about." But Daniel's memory was clearing like fog, lifting from a battlefield. "You said something about making sure the biker scum went down for this, that the real perpetrator had connections that made prosecution complicated." The breakthrough came when Daniel remembered Jenkins's specific words. "Nobody's going to believe a motorcycle gang member over law enforcement testimony. Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about," Daniel continued, his voice gaining strength. "But some battles are fought by corrupt cops who frame innocent veterans to protect guilty civilians." Warden Matthews' intervention came when she recognized that Max's consistent defensive behavior suggested a situational awareness requiring investigation. Her military background provided an understanding of service animal capabilities that civilian administrators might have dismissed. Tank Morrison's request for an immediate audience with prison administration was supported by documentation the Brotherhood had compiled during 5 years of appeals evidence suggesting Daniel's conviction was based on planted physical evidence and coerced witness testimony. The documentation included photographs, witness statements, and forensic analysis that official defense attorneys had failed to pursue a comprehensive case for Daniel's innocence that would have prevented a conviction if properly presented. Jenkins realized his involvement was being exposed through circumstances nobody had anticipated. Max's recognition had triggered Daniel's memory, while the Brotherhood's investigation provided corroborating evidence that 5 years of legal appeals had missed. Jenkins' attempt to leave the visitation room was blocked by security protocols requiring all personnel to remain during prisoner visits. His growing panic became obvious to guards who'd worked death row long enough to recognize suspicious behavior when corruption was being exposed. Max's aggressive focus, combined with Daniel's returning memories and Tank's documentation of law enforcement misconduct, created a convergence of evidence revealing a systematic conspiracy designed to convict an innocent man whose veteran status and motorcycle membership made him a perfect target. "Officer Jenkins," Warden Matthews said with an authority earned through military service, Explain your presence at Mr. Rodriguez's arrest 5 years ago, despite your assignment to a different precinct. Jenkins' response revealed the depths of the corruption. I was conducting routine patrol when I observed suspicious activity requiring backup assistance. But Tank's documentation proved Jenkins had been specifically assigned to Daniel's case through interdepartmental coordination designed to ensure a conviction through planted evidence that would have been impossible without systematic cooperation between multiple law enforcement agencies. Prison alarms began sounding as the situation escalated beyond a routine final visit into the exposure of institutional corruption that threatened careers throughout the justice system. The breakthrough came when Jenkins realized continued denial would worsen the consequences when an internal affairs investigation revealed his involvement in a systematic corruption that had resulted in the wrongful conviction of a combat veteran whose innocence could be proven through evidence the Brotherhood's investigation had compiled. Look, Rodriguez was supposed to be guilty, Jenkins admitted under pressure from the documented evidence and Max's continued identification. The real perpetrator had political connections that made prosecution complicated. We needed someone who fit the profile. The confession revealed a systematic targeting of veterans whose motorcycle membership made them convenient scapegoats for crimes committed by people whose connections protected them from investigation while ensuring alternative suspects would be convicted regardless of evidence. You planted that evidence, Daniel said with a certainty that 5 years of doubt hadn't destroyed. The drugs in your saddlebags, the witness who said you were at the scene, all fabricated because prosecuting the real killer would have embarrassed people with power. Jenkins continued, his confession implicating multiple officers and prosecutors. Daniel's response demonstrated a grace that death row hadn't broken. Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about, but some battles are fought by people who've decided the outcome regardless of truth or justice. Warden Matthews' immediate suspension of Daniel's execution came when Jenkins' confession, combined with Max's behavioral evidence and Brotherhood documentation, created overwhelming proof of a wrongful conviction based on planted evidence and systematic corruption. Emergency intervention by Governor Williams followed within hours, his military background providing an understanding of systematic bias against veterans whose service had protected freedoms that the civilian justice system was now abusing through corruption. Daniel Rodriguez served his country with honor, Governor Williams announced during an emergency press conference, and our justice system failed him through systematic targeting based on prejudice rather than evidence. The immediate investigation revealed Daniel's case represented a pattern of wrongful convictions advancing prosecutorial careers while actual perpetrators remained free to commit additional crimes that proper investigation could have prevented. Jenkins and multiple co-conspirators faced federal charges for civil rights violations, while Daniel's conviction was overturned with complete exoneration and immediate release from death row, where he'd spent 5 years for crimes he'd never committed. Governor Williams' emergency commutation came within hours of the scheduled execution, demonstrating how close systematic corruption had come to murdering an innocent combat veteran. Tank Morrison and the Phoenix Hells Angels had maintained a 5-year vigil, proving a loyalty that sustained the Brotherhood through institutional persecution. Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about, Daniel told media outside the prison gates, But some battles require brothers willing to fight alongside you when systems designed to protect justice become corrupted by people whose careers matter more than truth. Max maintained a protective position throughout the press conference, his service training continuing to provide psychological support that the civilian mental health system had failed to offer during wrongful imprisonment. The reunion between Daniel and his brotherhood created emotional scenes that demonstrated a loyalty transcending civilian understanding of military bonds forged in combat and maintained through a motorcycle culture valuing honor above convenience. Daniel's reunion with his Hells Angels family created scenes civilian observers rarely witness combat veterans embracing a brother whose innocence they'd never doubted, despite overwhelming pressure to abandon a member whose conviction brought negative attention to motorcycle culture. Tank Morrison's tears surprised media who'd never seen a motorcycle club president display vulnerability. His military bearing cracked under the relief that the Brotherhood's investigation had saved an innocent brother from execution. "Brother, we never stopped fighting," Tank told Daniel, while Max maintained a protective position, creating a triangle of loyalty representing military service, motorcycle brotherhood, and service animal dedication that had combined to expose corruption and prevent a murder disguised as justice. Ghost Martinez and 15 Phoenix chapter members formed an honor guard around Daniel, whose dignity had never wavered despite systematic abuse by a justice system designed to protect rather than persecute veterans. Jenkins' confession initiated a broader federal investigation revealing a systematic pattern of targeting veterans and motorcycle members whose appearance made them convenient scapegoats for unsolved crimes requiring resolution to advance prosecutorial careers. Over 30 wrongful convictions resulted from coordinated law enforcement corruption involving multiple agencies whose cooperation had ensured the conviction of innocent people while protecting actual criminals whose political connections made prosecution inconvenient. Daniel's exoneration became the catalyst for a comprehensive review of death penalty cases involving veterans and motorcycle members, revealing a systematic bias that had resulted in wrongful convictions based on prejudice rather than evidence. The investigation expanded to include prosecutorial misconduct, police corruption, and judicial bias that had created an institutional failure requiring congressional intervention and federal oversight to prevent future wrongful convictions of people whose military service should have protected them from persecution. Daniel's case inspired federal legislation requiring an independent review of death penalty convictions involving military veterans, while motorcycle clubs gained legal recognition as legitimate organizations whose membership couldn't be used as criminal evidence. The Daniel Rodriguez Act mandated service animals be permitted during legal proceedings involving combat veterans, recognizing that PTSD required accommodation rather than discrimination by a justice system that should protect rather than persecute people whose sacrifice had earned consideration. Jenkins and 17 co-conspirators faced federal charges for civil rights violations, while prosecutors whose careers were built on wrongful convictions faced disbarment and criminal prosecution for a systematic power abuse that had corrupted justice beyond individual misconduct to institutional failure. Max became a national symbol of loyalty, his role in exposing corruption demonstrating that truth could emerge from unexpected sources when service animals maintained a dedication surpassing human reliability in protecting partners whose innocence had been questioned. Daniel's reintegration was supported by the Phoenix Hells Angels, whose loyalty had sustained him through wrongful imprisonment while maintaining his motorcycle and restoring his community reputation that had learned to recognize systematic bias against veterans whose service deserved celebration rather than criminalization. Congressional testimony about his experience influenced military justice reform and veteran advocacy programs designed to prevent future wrongful convictions of combat veterans whose service should have protected them from institutional persecution. "Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about," became Daniel's message to veteran organizations nationwide. But those battles become winnable when brothers stand together against systematic corruption that targets people whose careers matter more than truth. Max resumed his role as service animal while maintaining national recognition as a loyalty symbol that had exposed corruption and prevented a murder, demonstrating that truth could emerge when dedication transcended human limitations in identifying threats and protecting innocent people. Daniel's exoneration triggered a comprehensive death penalty reform, while Jenkins's conspiracy faced federal prosecution, revealing a systematic corruption across multiple states where veterans and motorcycle members had been wrongfully convicted through coordinated misconduct designed to advance careers through convenient scapegoating. "Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about," Daniel told congressional committees investigating wrongful convictions. But those battles become winnable when service animals maintain a loyalty surpassing human reliability, while brothers refuse to abandon family regardless of systematic pressure. The Phoenix Hells Angels established a veteran advocacy program connecting military service with motorcycle brotherhood through legal assistance and community support, protecting combat veterans from institutional bias, while demonstrating a loyalty transcending civilian boundaries. 3 years later, Daniel had become a national advocate for wrongfully convicted veterans while maintaining leadership in the Phoenix Hells Angels that had proven loyalty could overcome systematic corruption when brothers refused to abandon family facing persecution based on prejudice rather than evidence. Max's story inspired service animal legislation protecting veterans' rights to assistance during legal proceedings, while his corruption exposure demonstrated that truth emerged from unexpected sources when dedication transcended human limitations in identifying threats and protecting innocent people from systematic abuse. Sometimes, the strongest bonds are forged in battles against injustice, teaching us that loyalty transcends convenience, truth transcends career advancement, and family stands together when systems fail to protect those who've already protected everyone else. The strongest people are usually fighting battles you know nothing about, and sometimes those battles are won by the loyalty of a service animal whose dedication reveals corruption that human systems failed to detect, proving that truth emerges from unexpected sources when love transcends the lies that powerful people use to destroy innocent lives.